to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach.
And I'm your co-MC, Rich. And today we have on Jeremy Strandberg. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rich. Thanks for having me. Hi, Rich.
Hey. So, Jeremy, how long have you been playing Powered by the Apocalypse games? What was your gateway?
Well, I guess like a lot of people, probably I started on Apocalypse World and then, I started reading Apocalypse World first. And the first game I really ran was Dungeon World back in, 2012. But I'm the kind of guy that starts hacking and tinkering with a game even before he plays it.
You're one of those people. Cool. And the first Dungeon World you started off, you ran the game? How long did it go? Did it go for a few months, just a few sessions?
No, it was just a one-shot. I made a little adventure starter for it based off Marshall Miller's stuff. It was very Conan-inspired.
Cool. Well, let's jump on over here and read a sitch. So in Read a Sitch, in this segment, we ask our guest to talk about a specific issue of play, a journal of play, to highlight something about gaming or possibly PBTA. And Jeremy, you've got a really interesting topic for us to talk about today. You want to kick us off with your thoughts?
Sure. What I wanted to talk about was how we can portray the passage of time and kind of make that a meaningful part of play. And so by stretches of time, I mean the things that happen between adventures or that we tend to gloss over between scenes. Mm-hmm. So the typical stuff would be the downtime between stories or adventures, travel, right? The long legs of travel that happen, particularly in a game like Dungeon World. But even in like a game like Apocalypse World or Dungeon World, the tense, empty room type of exploration where you're not really, because it's not an OSR game, you're not, like poking every individual flagstone and everything. But there's still that time there, and there's still an emotional connection that you can get out of that, or an emotional feel that you can get out of that. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Now, obviously, you don't always want to do this, right? Like if you're pressed for time, if you're doing a one-shot or a con game, you're probably just going to skip to the good stuff and just gloss over it very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. But if you are playing a slower game, like a game that really benefits from breathing, like it's an ongoing Dungeon World game or an ongoing game just between you and your friends, and you're not in a rush, you just get together every other week or something like that, there can be some real benefit of taking your time and really exploring those spaces that we typically gloss over. Some games kind of have mechanics for dealing with these types of interstitial time. I'm thinking like in Apocalypse World, you've got moves for the beginning of session or when there's a downtime or a stretch of time for like the hard holder rolls their wealth move at the beginning of the session to kind of see how things are going and generate situation from that. And then in Dungeon World, you've got moves like Undertake a Perilous Journey, which sort of prescribes a way to deal with that time frame. But even with those, you've got an opportunity to kind of zoom in on the time that's been passing and really kind of make it breathe. So there's a few techniques that I think are worth talking about and looking at for that. If you've got the stretch of time that is happening between sessions and you have the time and the energy to prep it, a love letter can be very good. I'm sort of assuming that longtime listeners will know what I'm talking about when I say a love letter, right? The dear character, here's what's happened in the meantime, make a roll, and then make some choices on this. And those can be very, very effective, particularly at jumping a big chunk of time where a lot is potentially happening that you don't necessarily want to go over in play. But what I'm thinking of more is just for things like legs of travel. Or when you're in the middle of a session and they get home and you've still got a couple hours of play left and you want to kind of see what happens or talk about what happens in that time where there's not a lot of action, there's not a lot of scenes, there's not a lot of the GM making moves that the players need to respond to. And to kind of make that feel like real time. So the first thing, of course, that you can do is you can take this as an opportunity to prompt conversations. So you can either take it yourself and encourage or just offer to the PCs an opportunity to have a conversation, like just say something like, would anyone like to play out a conversation in character? Or anyone want to have a scene with another character? Does anybody want to try and resolve a bond or like hit a flag or hit a drive or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
But you can also do it sort of as a reaction to things that you are curious about. So if during a previous scene there's a tense moment or a blow up between two PCs, during the next stretch of time, you can say something like, hey, I'm wondering, does Karina ever apologize to Islwyn about that? And if so, then okay, well, why don't we frame the scene and play that out? And of course, when you're doing something like this, you want to manage the spotlight. You still are playing the game. And if anyone triggers a move, you obviously go to the move and you resolve it. But you do want to kind of watch out for not letting those things drag on. Don't take up too much time with them, but do give them the chance to breathe. And I think that that is a good way to take advantage of that passage of time. And then you can kind of cut from that to the next interesting thing, the next scene. But if you got a big group, or if you just have players that don't particularly enjoy dropping into character and having those character-to-character conversations, obviously that's not going to be a particularly good tool. So another tool that I think is particularly good, and this is probably my favorite one overall, is just really aggressively asking questions, particularly if all of the PCs are experiencing the time jump together, right? Like if it's a travel where they're all spending days on the road or even just hours on the road, going around and asking each character a question, either the same question or a slightly different question. It kind of creates that montage feel that you get in like the Fellowship of the Rings, where, you know, we're just seeing them travel and we get a glimpse and a glimpse and a glimpse and a glimpse. And that Q&A going around the table really feels like that it evokes that same feeling in your headspace. So I've always found that to be a particularly nice way to make it feel like time is passing. And that could be like a paint the scene technique where you ask everyone something like, what do you notice that tells you that this used to be a place of grandeur that has fallen into ruin? And everybody answers that same question. But it could also be something like in a recent game that we did where there were 3 PCs, they were traipsing out into the forest. It was the first time for one of the characters to go. And I asked that character, okay, what's the most unexpected thing about traveling through the Great Wood? And then I asked a different character right after that, what's the worst part about this trip? And then I asked the third character, who is the professional hunter, right, who spent her life in the woods, or the last few years in the woods at least, what's the most annoying thing about traveling with these two?
That's good.
So you get, you kind of have a combination of them establishing the scene itself and kind of riffing on the environment. You've got the interpersonal aspect of it that you're kind of bringing to light, and you're also kind of getting into the headspace of the characters. And that to me really sort of meshes well with the kind of experience of just going on a walk with some people. There's a lot of quiet time. There's a lot of thinking about it, but there's also that presence of the others that you have in mind.
Cool.
Yeah. So building off of that, I also like to get introspective with the questions that I'm asking, particularly like on the road or when they're making camp kind of away from their normal lives. Things like, what do you find yourself missing the most? Whose smile do you find yourself thinking about? What are you most dreading about where you're headed? One of my favorite examples was when our murder hobo character was basically like part of this expedition back to the town where that character grew up in. And this was an absolute cutthroat character, right? Like we'd seen him murder people 5 or 6 times already on screen. And just asked him the question one night when they were like at one point when they were all making camp. So Mouse, who was the first person that you murdered? And he started spieling on this accidental death that he had caused. And I just like wouldn't let him go with that and asked him, no, not whose death were you first responsible for? Who did you murder?
Mm.
And that really, again, just sort of taking that opportunity to ask those questions while we're in a normally down time made it to be a meaningful part of play and a meaningful experience during play. The other place that I'd like, where I think it's worth thinking about the questions that you ask and using this kind of Q&A approach is for downtime at a home base or at a relatively safe period of time. So things like just asking questions about daily life, keeping it zoomed out, but asking, what's your day look like while you're here? What sort of mundane chore is occupying your time? If it's an actual home, like what about your home is bugging you and why haven't you done anything to fix it? Just to sort of like get little things that really get an insight into who this character is and what their living situation is. And then you can kind of expand that and make it a little bit more pointed and ask questions about their interactions with their neighbors. Why have things been so strained between you and Matilda since you returned? What's your brother been nagging you about? Who have you been spending the most time with when you can? Again, just to sort of build out that sense of what the character's life is like when they aren't on an adventure. And again, also you can go internal on this, right? Get introspective. And particularly, I think that's useful to ask them questions about things that have happened on their most recent expedition or adventure or dangerous situation or whatever they've been in. Really kind of like exploring what does it do to someone to go on to a difficult situation in Apocalypse World. What does it do to someone to go out on a raid against the cannibals and then come home and have to slot back into your normal, whatever your normal life was. So asking them like, how are they sleeping since they got back? Are you happy to be home? Are you feeling cooped up? Or what have you been finding yourself thinking about? And making space to ask those questions that stretch over periods of time, as opposed to what are you thinking about right now? What are you doing right now? Asking them questions about what are they thinking about or what are they experiencing or what are they dealing with over a period of time.
I really like that question about how you've been sleeping. There's a lot you can mine out of that, and people can take it lots of different directions. That's cool.
Like how have you been sleeping on this journey, and how are you feeling when you wake up? Are you not feeling great? Why?
And then I guess the other thing that I should just probably point out, obviously there's also just description. I think the Q&A is probably the most powerful thing to get stuff that you weren't expecting to play to find out. But I think it's also valuable to spend a little bit of time just talking about how things change. How does the terrain change, as they travel? How do the seasons change from month to month if they've got an extended period of downtime? And particularly if there is a period of downtime where they're at a home base and they know a bunch of NPCs, just bringing up things about how the lives of the NPCs around them are changing. Just mentioning that so-and-so had their baby and their partner is just as proud as can be. Or that so-and-so is getting older and has developed a cough. Or this kid is all grown up and, hey, check it out. It seems like they're kind of sweet on this kid and you see them hanging around together. And just dropping those little details when the characters are around their home base, I think it makes the players feel a lot more connected to the home base, like to the Hardhold or to, whichever town they've been to last. And just when done right, and unless they're a bunch of murder hobos, it hopefully brings out a connection, like an emotional connection to those characters.
Open your brain.
It's now time to open your brain, where our guests will discuss a Powered by the Apocalypse game they've designed. Jeremy, talk to us about Stonetop. What's the setting? What's the game about?
Stonetop is it's an adaptation of Dungeon World. Significant changes to the core rules and so forth. But the setting and what the game's about is the player characters are the local heroes of an isolated village, Stonetop. It's an Iron Age village built around this huge megalith, and no one knows what the megalith is or what it's for, how it got there. It just is, and the village has always been there. The whole region around the village is built on the bones of an ancient, giant-sized civilization. You got a spooky forest to the east and a great open prairie to the west and hills to the north and mountains further off. It's a lowish magic setting. The magic is pretty much always weird and scary and costly, even when the player characters are wielding it. But the specifics of a lot of this are really left up to the players to come up with.
Fun.
So it's up for the players to decide how much they want to engage with that part of the setting or don't want to engage with it?
Yeah, like a lot of games, you'll have your sort of starting setting, or kind of your implied bits about the setting, where there is this village. It's called Stonetop. There's a stone in the middle of it. It's Iron Age technology. We have certain givens, and there's a map provided to play around in and to kind of riff off of. But there's a lot of space in the map. And there are definitely setting details that the game and the mechanics are going to kind of assume, but we don't have every hex mapped out on everything. So what we've generally found is that everyone kind of starts at this same point, and then as you make your characters, as you define the character's relationship to the village and the character's pasts, you start to fill in your own version of Stonetop. And then as you start creating adventures and playing through these adventures, you'll start to fill in more and more of the map, and it becomes a more unique world and more unique set of issues for each of you. So the PCs, like if you look at the character classes, they'll definitely feel like your classic D&D archetypes, at least some of them will, but they've all kind of got a localized twist to them. So like there's no thief, but there is the fox. And there's no fighter, but there is the heavy. Each of the playbooks has a choice of backgrounds that kind of tells us how they became what they are and what their role in the village is. So the heavy might be the sheriff, or the heavy might be someone who led a life of violence and has put it behind them and settled or resettled in Stonetop. Or they might be someone who is actually touched by the gods and bears the marks of the Storm Lord and is like crackling with electricity. They're all tied to the village and they're all important residents of the village, but they are exceptional people. And when something goes wrong, and it often will, the PCs are the ones to go deal with it.
What mechanics are different in this game versus Apocalypse World or Dungeon World?
Yeah, it's probably fairer to compare it to Dungeon World. Like in a lot of ways, it actually moves back towards Apocalypse World than Dungeon World was.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest structural difference is, and the biggest mechanical difference is that the town itself has a character sheet. When you start play, you've got Stonetop. There's some basic things that are just kind of generally always true. It has stats, so it's got a fortunes stat and a population stat and a defenses and prosperity. And these have moves that kick in and engage. The biggest one being that there's a seasons change move. And so every time the seasons change, like in spring and summer and autumn and winter, you roll the current fortunes of the steading. And then that's going to tell you if you have some sort of an opportunity or a boon this season, or if you have a threat this season, or more often than not, you have some combination of the two of those. And pursuing those opportunities or dealing with the threats that arise basically becomes the general structure of the game.
What's your favorite move in the game and why?
I am torn. I've got 3 babies, and of course I have to choose one.
The other 2 won't know. We won't tell them.
Yeah. Well, I will say one of them is a move about asking questions of each other during downtime. It's not even so much a move as a procedural conversation where there's a list of questions and you go around taking turns with each player asking a different question of a different character. And that has proven to be very, very effective at kind of just generating character development and relationship development. But the one that I wanted to highlight was the rewrite to the Parlay move from Dungeon World. Should I just read the text? Or
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So there's 2 flavors of it. There's the Parlay versus NPCs. So the text for that is, when you press or entice an NPC, say what you want them to do or not do. If they have reason to resist, roll plus charisma. On a 10 plus, they either do as you want or reveal the easiest way to convince them. And on a 7 to 9, they reveal something you can do to convince them that would likely be costly, tricky, or distasteful. The reason that I like this, and I kind of wanted to highlight this as probably my favorite move on this, in Stonetop, you are adventurers going on adventures. But you're not adventurers going on adventures for fortune and glory. You're going on adventures on behalf of your friends and your neighbors. And so having some sort of a move that helps us to deal with the negotiation and putting pressure on people and trying to get people to go along with you that isn't inherently manipulative was a fairly important thing for me. And what this move is doing is it's giving you a trigger that you can pretty easily recognize during play. Like when, I think we've all had that moment where one player is talking to an NPC and the NPC is putting up a little, like, I don't know about that. And then the player kind of pushes a little bit. And having some way to then, okay, let's go to the dice and then have the dice suggest what happens next. there's value in that. And what makes this particularly interesting and I think useful is that on the 10 plus, you end up having a judgment call from the GM to say, okay, do they have a legitimate reason to say no at this point? If not, I'll just go ahead and let them have it. Or if they're asking me to do something in a way that just doesn't make sense, as the GM, I still have the out of them saying no, but I then have to reveal the easiest way that you could convince them. And it doesn't have to be an easy way to convince them. It just has to be the easiest way to convince them. In play, this often looks like, say, I'm trying to convince the blacksmith to basically give me that old, or sell me or trade me that old bit of bronze iron armor that they've got because I need to go and out in the woods and deal with something. And it's, it's a family heirloom. And I try asking him, hey, it's for the good of the town, yada, yada, yada. And the GM's looking at that and going like, yeah, but I just don't know if he's buying it. Well, then the GM can turn around and say, he's not buying it just with that appeal. But if you appeal to his ego and his sense of history, then I think that would close the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gives the player basically a path forward. They might not choose to take it, but it says, all right, here's what you can do to get what you want from this person. And that sort of simultaneously reveals the nature of the NPC, but it doesn't just necessarily let the PCs mind control them or get them to do whatever they want.
Nice.
And then in the 7 to 9, the fact that you can then make that costly, tricky, or my favorite, distasteful, really allows you to kind of put the screws on the PC and say, okay, how is it worth it to you? Do you really want them to do this? Or are you willing to do this other thing that you dislike?
Yeah, really it takes Parlay and removes it from being a manipulation move to you're not necessarily good at manipulating. You're good at doing a cold read on someone to say, yeah, but here, I've discerned this is what this NPC really wants.
Mm-hmm. To me, that actually maps with how, in my experience, a lot of people who are good at negotiation, but also people who are good at manipulation, are able to push in one direction, see how you respond to that, and then, based off of your response, figure out what the better approach is. You see that a lot in people who are good at sales, and it can be manipulative, but it can also just be very genuine. And I think that's what I like the most about this.
That's cool. I got to tell you, Jeremy, gotten us pretty interested in seeing that possibly in some play. What do you think about jumping on over here and acting under fire? We get a taste of some Stonetop.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
It is time to act under fire.
So our next segment is Act Under Fire, where Jeremy will run us a short play segment of Stonetop.
All right. Rich, it looks like you are going to be playing the heavy.
I am the heavy.
All right. And I've pre-gen this character, so your background is that you are the sheriff.
Sheriff Heavy Pleswin. I love that. Such a cool name. Pleswin.
Pluswin.
And Rach, you are going to be the would-be hero.
That I will be. Well,
All
you know
right.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for my would-be hero, I'm going to be all grown up. I think I grew into this role relatively late in life. I have an earnest voice, a little bit scrawny, but soulful eyes. I mean well deep down inside.
So soulful. So are you from Stonetop originally, or did you move here later?
Yeah, I think she's from Stonetop. I'm going to go with Anwin as a name.
Anwin? All right. And Pluswin, are you from Stonetop originally? Did you move here from somewhere else?
I think I came to live here after these history of violence questions were answered.
Okay. Where do you think you moved from?
I think Marsh Edge.
So you came here from Marsh Edge, and why don't you tell us a little bit about your history of violence?
Well, the history of violence for Pleswin is that he spent time as one of Brennan's Claws, which is this gang that Brennan no longer runs because he's busy marshalling, but I guess he sent Ivan off, his lieutenant, and said, hey, go forth and prosper by causing trouble. And Pleswin rode into town to Stonetop when they decided things were just not as successful being highwaymen. The violence done on the folks of Stonetop was one step too far for Pluswin, and he turned on them, bested Ivan and a number of the gang members, and drove them out. And then they made him sheriff.
Okay, so you were part of a group that actually attacked Stonetop years ago.
Yes.
Cool. So what do you fear most, Anwin?
I think Anwin fears that they won't take her seriously. They said she's a bit scrawny, she's really earnest, she really wants to do this thing, but she doesn't register as a soldier-like hero.
Great. Okay, do either of you have any questions for each other?
Onwin, how did you prove to me that you were destined to be a hero and made me believe it?
I think we met in like a tavern in town, and I think you shared at one point a story about your past, and I earnestly listened to it. I think you may have revealed a little bit too much about your past, and I didn't dismiss you out of hand, even though you were a highwayman at one point. I was like, no, I can understand where you're coming from. If I figured out your dark secret, I didn't let it slip.
Neat.
Cool. So there's a trust there between Pluswin and Anwin?
Yeah, I believe it, Anwin.
You believe in me? Oh.
So spring has sprung in Stonetop. It's still fairly early in the season. It's still fairly chilly, but for the last few weeks, things have started to go missing around town. And Anwin and Pluswin, I'd like you to tell me what little thing has gone missing from outside of each of your homes recently.
My favorite pair of tongs. What would they even do with tongs?
Outside of Onwin's house, she had a rain barrel to collect the rainwater. And one day that went missing, which was very peculiar given the size of it.
What could possibly have done that? Well, that kind of gets us to the next question. So everyone around the village has been blaming the recent trouble on Crinwin, who are these weird gray-skinned, kind of child-sized things that live in the Great Wood. And I think you maybe just answered the question, Onwin. Why do you suspect that it's something or someone else?
Because the Crenwin are small. I don't understand. Like, other than maybe there's some kind of prejudice that she hasn't been exposed to as to why you would blame these creatures.
All right. Like, logistically, it just seems impossible that they could have done it.
That or someone else took my rain barrel.
Yeah. Fair enough. What about you, Pluswin? Why are you somewhat suspicious of it being Crinwin?
If they really are stealing things, the Kremlins seem to be a little bit more utilitarian, and a rain barrel and tongs seems not super useful for those little folk. Just doesn't stand to reason. If you're going to come into Stonetop and take something, what would you use it for?
Fair enough. So let me set the scene. It's a cold spring evening. It's near midnight. There's a cold wind blowing from the southeast. Which one of you has the misfortune of manning the West Watchtower tonight?
It wasn't supposed to be me, but Jorge took sick, or claims to. And if I find out he was at the tavern, there's going to be words.
Awesome. What's the worst part of this job? Keeping watch?
Staying awake.
What do you do to stay awake?
I bite my thumb occasionally. Not so anybody can see me. I just, looks like I'm just wiping my nose or the upper part of my lip, and I just bite into the, it sucks. But it works.
And what about you, Onwin? Where are you on this chilly evening? Are you at home? Are you in the pub? Are you out and about?
I think she's walking back from working on one of the farms. She stayed a little bit later. She went above and beyond, worked a little bit longer than she should have, and is wandering back after sunset by herself.
Yeah, I think maybe Treffer had you doing like some obscure thing out by the old wall on the farthest reaches of the fields, and claimed for whatever reason that a particular weed needed to be harvested under the peak of moonrise.
But only tonight. Has to be done tonight.
Has to be done tonight. Yeah, exactly. Which, of course, is the coldest night in the last 4 weeks. That wind ripping out from the south is just killer. Well, conveniently, I think as you are maybe heading almost home, like maybe you're reaching for the doorknob of the house that you grew up in, probably thinking of nothing but getting a good night's sleep, when there's a clanking and a clattering coming from not too far from here, almost immediately followed with barking from somebody's dog, and then a scream. Onwin, what do you do?
I am going to snap to attention once I hear the dog barking. And Onwin recognizes a couple of different dogs around town. This is definitely one a couple of houses down. And then the scream, she bolts towards the scream.
All right.
Doesn't even bother to check if her weapons are here.
And what about Pluswin? You're on the watchtower and you hear that scream. What do you do?
I'm supposed to be watching outside of the town, but I will ignore that, and at my vantage point, maybe I can pick out something. So I'll peer off towards, I think that bark sounded like it was a dog that everyone else calls Beggar, but the person who named it was trying to call it Bigger. A weird marsh edge accent.
Awesome. I think you probably spot Onwin, like, running towards it. Who knows why Onwin's out in the middle of the night like this. So not too long after the scream, the dog stopped barking, almost 30 seconds after that scream happens. And as you're kind of peering out there, Pluswin, you swear you see some dark figure dashing from the homes in Stonetop out over the ring wall and down into the Great Wood. And it's moving just so fast.
Well, that's what I'm here for. Onwin! And I try to point out where I saw things, and then I'm going to do that kind of cool thing where you go down the ladder by holding on to the rails on the side and slide down with your feet out and try to catch up.
Awesome. All right, so you're running after where the thing ran?
Unless I think I can spot where it's headed and then I could get there ahead of it.
No. Like, by the time you get there, it will be in the woods.
Oh.
You could try and power through and try and get there before it gets out of town.
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
Okay. Well, I think that definitely sounds like you are triggering defying danger. So the danger looms, in this case, the danger being somewhat figurative of this thing getting away. The stakes are high, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it getting away, and you do something chancy. Check if another move applies, and I don't think one does here. And if not, then it sounds to me like you are attempting to employ speed, agility, or finesse.
Yep, which means I'm rolling with Dex,
Yep.
which is a 0.
All right. What'd you get?
I got a 9.
You got a 9. Okay, great. What I'm kind of picturing is you do, like you said, that slide down the thing, land on the ring wall itself, which is sort of a low, like waist-high fieldstone wall, and just go like bolting across the wall. On a 7 to 9, we'll present a lesser success, a cost, or a consequence, and maybe a choice between them, or a chance to back down. And so what I think I'm going to do is give you a consequence and a chance to back down. So Stonetop sits on a bluff overlooking the Great Wood. It's maybe about 60 feet high and kind of not a direct sheer drop, but it's a pretty steep slope. And as you are running along the ring wall, you see this shadowy figure leaping off of that bluff out into the trees. You think you can get it and tackle it, but it will mean leaping out and going down into the trees yourself.
My only regret is that no one will be able to see exactly how awesome this would look.
I can see
you're
it.
going
I'll tell stories.
Yeah.
Yes!
All right. So are you going for it?
Yeah, I'm going for it, for sure.
Cool. So Onwin, you heard Pluswin say, Onwin! And silhouetted by the moonlight, you could kind of see which way he was pointing. Do you head where he was pointing, or do you go towards the home where the scream came from?
I think Onwin is going to linger, staring where Pluswin was, just long enough to see him badass and silhouetted against the moonlight as he takes that leap.
Woohoo!
And then yells, "But somebody might be hurt," before running towards the direction of the scream.
All right, cool. We're going to cut back to Pluswin in a little bit. But Onwin, you go around, and it is the home of Sorsha and Bethan, kind of a youngish couple. Sorsha actually moved here from Marsh Edge, hence the bigger beggar bit on the dog. But Bethan is laid out in the doorway, and he looks just wrong. Like, he's not wounded, he just looks like he hasn't eaten in 3 or 4 days. His skin is all sallow and sunken. His eyes are rolled back in the back of his head. And Sorsha is inside, just sort of like rocking back and forth, like she's in shock. What do you do?
I'm going to call up to Sorsha and say, what happened here? I'm going to go over to Bethan and do like a quick first aid, like assess the scene. Is there anything? Are they breathing? I've tried to follow my heroic senses, my instincts. Any response from them whatsoever?
Yeah, so I'm not going to make you roll for this. I think you just, like, when you touch him, he's very, very cold. But you put your hand over his heart. You feel it beat, but very slowly and very weakly. He's not bleeding. He doesn't appear to be injured. He just appears to be drained.
I'm going to grab a blanket, knowing how cold he is to the touch, and try to put it around him.
Yeah.
And stabilize him.
Okay, cool. So you do that. Probably occurs to you to drag him near the hearth, right?
I mean, that seems like the right thing to do. We want to get him warmed up and as stable as possible.
Sure.
Is this sort of draining injury a common occurrence?
I wouldn't say that it's common, but it certainly might be something that you have heard stories about if you want to, say, spout lore about this.
All right. I would love to spout lore. What stat is that?
Yeah, so when you consult your accumulated knowledge, roll plus int.
So that is a 7. Not the worst.
No, it is not the worst. So on a 7 to 9, the GM will tell you something interesting, and it's on you to make it useful. All right, so you seem to recall stories. There's a place not too far into the Great Wood, a cave that they call the Maw. There are a number of stories from the hunters and the trappers that all say that there's something scary that lives in the Maw. Nothing grows within a dozen strides of the cave mouth, and everything around it is blackened and dead and drained of life. When you see this, that's the first thing that probably comes to your mind.
I think that the idea of this creature that could possess such cruelty and desire for suffering is going to spark that anger within Onwen. And she's going to sort of snap to attention and go, oh no. Pluswen went off towards the woods. Does Bethan look like he would be stable if I had to run off and do my heroic duties?
He definitely should see a healer or have someone who knows what they're doing tend to him. His wife is right there. Sorsha is right there, but she is absolutely distraught and doesn't seem to be reacting to anything. But if you could get her to tend to him, you're pretty sure that he'd be fine. Or at least that he'd live out the night.
Okay, I'm going to turn to her and say, I need your help over here. He needs to stay warm and support it, and he'll make it through the night, but I need you to help. Someone else might be in trouble.
All right. So you are absolutely pressing her to do something, right? And she absolutely has reason to resist. She's in shock. So this is going to be a parlay. So I'm going to ask you to roll plus charisma.
Well, that is something I have a +1 in, so that's a 10.
Hey, awesome. On a 10 plus, they will do as you want, or they'll reveal the easiest way for you to convince them. So I actually think that with you just sort of grabbing her, looking her in the eye and telling her, hey, you need to help your husband, that's plenty. That'll kind of snap her out of it. But the other good thing that happens is because you are a would-be hero, one of your moves is potential for greatness. Once per level, when you roll a stat and get up 10 plus, you mark one of the following and note the level at which you marked it. You can either choose to increase the stat that you rolled by 1 to a maximum of +2, or increase your max hit points, or increase your damage die. And this is basically to represent the fact that the would-be hero starts with absolute crap for stats, but as we play the would-be hero, as they achieve successes, they actually quickly become a hero.
Oh, I definitely think that Onwen's going to go up in charisma. She's very charismatic.
All right.
Nice.
So, jumping back to Pluswen, who threw himself off of the ring wall after this dark shape. You find yourself grabbing onto what you expected to be something big and muscular based off of how quickly it was moving.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like grabbing a billowing cloak. And it is the most unnerving thing as before your lizard brain kicks in and goes, oh crap, we're falling. So you've got this billowy cape thing in your grasp, but you are quickly like tumbling down the bluff side. It's going to be bad if you don't manage to arrest your fall somehow. What do you do?
Does this billowing thing have no mass whatsoever? Like, can I land on it real hard?
You could certainly like try and position it.
I mean, it goes from cape to sled, sounds like a plan.
Yeah, to me that sounds like you're just sort of trying to twist it underneath yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like defying danger with strength to me.
Oh, I'll take that for sure. I've got a +2 in strength.
Oh, good for you.
But I rolled a 4, so that is a 6.
Okay. Well, that is mark XP for what it's worth. So I think what happens is you do get it to kind of like twist underneath you and try and use it to cushion your fall, and you find out exactly how little mass this thing actually has. And it's right underneath you as you hit sort of the first tree trunk sticking out of the bluff, and it effectively does not cushion you at all. It's kung kung wham, and you end up taking a D8 of damage. If you're wearing your armor, which seems reasonable if you were on watch, then I think that would definitely apply. So you can subtract 2 from this. But you're definitely like you just smashed into a tree trunk on a maybe 60-degree slope after tumbling a good 10 to 15 feet.
That sounds terrible. Let's see how terrible.
Yeah.
I rolled a 4, but I am armored.
That means that you only end up losing 2 hit points. So you smash into the tree, and the billowing form just sort of like slithers out from underneath you as you're kind of like catching your breath and figuring out what's going on. And it looms up, and you realize it's not so much a cloak that you grabbed onto, but a series almost of like bandages, of black flowing bandages, just like writhing and rippling around and raising up into a wraith-like figure. And it looms over you. Everything starts to go chill. And, well, play with time a little bit. On when you come like rushing over the edge of the ring wall, looking down and see this thing grabbing +1 by the lapels and starting to like hoist him up. And you see the ground around him starting to become brittle with frost. And you see your breath in the air. Onwin, what do you do?
I think I'm going to draw my sword that I totally have with me, and then I'm going to hold my breath and take a heroic dive and see if I could skid down the bluff and whack this thing to at least knock +1 down.
Mm-hmm.
And buy us a little bit of time to regroup.
Awesome. You know what? Let's just go with a hack and slash on this. It's not like this thing is seeing this coming.
It's a little bit ridiculous. And I also rolled terribly ridiculous because that's a 2.
Okay, but this is where being the would-be hero helps. So you are an impetuous youth. When you make a move and come up short, you can give it your all and turn a 6- into a 7 to 9. But if you do, pick one, and the GM will fill in the details. You get hurt, you cause collateral damage, endanger others, or escalate the situation, or something on your person is lost or breaks.
Let's go if something on my person gets lost or broken. Maybe perhaps one of my special items.
Okay, we were thinking exactly the same thing. So we're going to wrap the scene up, so I'm not going to ask you to roll damage or roll the damage that you receive back from this thing. I believe what happens is you do, in fact, make your heroic leap down the thing and chop into this billowing wraith-like figure, and it does indeed drop +1, which is great, but it then screeches at you and kind of like a Dementor type thing, like starts sucking energy out of you and then reaches into your, at you, snatches something out of your pocket, and flees down into the great wood. And I think that's probably, of course, it is with the tinderbox from your grandmother that it has run off with.
Oh, for sure. And Onwood will figure that out at some point when we get back to town. But that's for another scene.
Right. That's for another scene. That seems like a good place to call it.
That was fun, Jeremy. Thank you so much for sharing Stonetop with us. Now, Stonetop, as this episode comes out, still has some time left on Kickstarter. You are kickstarting. It looks like you've already met your funding goal. Congratulations.
We did.
Just continuing to build that. We will have a link in the show notes to the Stonetop Kickstarter. Really appreciate you coming on so that we could chat with you about the game.
Great to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Jeremy, if our listeners want to follow your work on social media, where can they find you?
You can find me at spoutinglore.blogspot.com. You can also find me in the Dungeon World Discord. I frequent the Dungeon World Reddit, their subreddit as well. And that's probably the best places to find me.
And thank you once again for coming on the show.
Well, thank you guys. It's been great.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Drowning Attitude. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hi listeners, I want to let you know about Codex Starlight 2, the newest issue of our indie role-playing game magazine, coming to the Gauntlet Patreon feed in early March. Codex Starlight 2 is one of the biggest and best issues yet, and it features Snipe Hunt, an original game inspired by movies like Red Dawn and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in which a teenager takes a group of kids out into the woods for a snipe hunt in order to protect them from a calamity taking place in the town they live in. Bed, Breakfast, and Beyond, a one-shot hack of Brindlewood Bay about an elderly gay couple who run a bed and breakfast trying to figure out why guests keep disappearing from room 3. The Temple of the Peerless Star, a trophy gold incursion inspired by the dungeon made famous in the Discern Realities podcast and later published for Dungeon World in the original Codex Starlight. We've taken the core of that dungeon and expanded it for trophy gold, and it's great. 3 dozen more signs the stars are right, a miscellaneous sequel, 7 original illustrations, and a custom layout. You can get Codex Starlight 2 in the Gauntlet Patreon feed in March by making a $6 pledge. That's at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.